Welcome to the Rabbi and the Shrink. This is Dr. Margarita Guri, the Shrink, and everyone's favorite rabbi,
Yonason Goldson. And today we are very pleased to have with us all the way from Israel, Gila Manolson. She is a deep thinker, a prolific author, a speaker, and I'd just like to add that Gila, more than 25 years ago, my wife taught your book, The Magic Touch, in her high school class in Yeshiva High School. And it
Thanks
was
for
really,
making me
well, I think we're all contemporaries here. But it really had a transformative effect on her students in opening up their eyes to understand a way of life and a discipline that had seemed very formal, very foreign, and very unnatural to them. So I have some firsthand experience with your work, and we are delighted to have you join us. So welcome.
Welcome.
Thanks
I
for the
love your
pleasure.
story that you came from a secular background and you went to Yale and you had a lot of advocacy in your heart. You went to Europe after you finished college, and then you ended up in Jerusalem and found yourself at a very ultra-Orthodox wedding. Please tell us about your experience and how that changed you to doing what you're doing now.
Okay, I can tell you a story before that also that'll give you a little bit more insight into who I am.
Thank you.
When I first came to Jerusalem as a secular tourist in jeans and a backpack, of course, I wanted to see the Western Wall, the Kotel. So I went down the stairs to the Kotel Plaza, and right away I saw something that really, really dismayed me, that there was a partition separating the men from the women at the Kotel. And so I come from a very strong feminist background. And so I said to myself, well, if these religious people want to sex segregate themselves, fine, but I'm going in where I want to go in. And I marched right into the men's section. And I made it about halfway to the wall before a guard spotted me and I guess realized that this person in jeans was a female. And he came running after me and he said to me in broken English, no, you not to be here, you to be there, and pointed towards the women's section and escorted me out. And I was absolutely seeing red about Judaism. I wanted nothing to do with it. I left the Kotel Plaza, wandered around the old city for a few hours, and then something kind of drew me back. I don't know, it's something, the hand of God, I don't know. But I went back to the Kotel Plaza. I went into the women's side, didn't feel anything. It's kind of hard to feel something at the Kotel when you're an atheist, And on my way out, a woman tapped me on the shoulder and she said, "Excuse me, are you Jewish?" And I said, "Yes, why?" And she said, "Well, you look like a tourist. I thought maybe you might be interested in spending Shabbat with a religious family or attending some classes on Judaism." And I said, "Listen, lady, before we talk about me going to any classes on Judaism, why don't you tell me," and I'll clean up my language here a little bit, okay? "What the heck is this partition doing here for?" And she said to me, "Wouldn't you have a really hard time concentrating on your prayers if there was a really cute guy standing right next to you?" And I thought, yeah. And that was my first glimmer that things in Judaism might make sense. And so I already went to this Orthodox wedding that you mentioned with that feeling. It was my second day of classes at an all women's, a seminary, an Orthodox Jewish seminary. And I had been invited to kind of crash this Orthodox wedding, which I thought was kind of cool. All I had to do was put on a skirt and they would take me. And so I put on the one skirt I owned and I get taken to this wedding. I enter the hall and right away I see this beautiful bride in a very, very, very modest Victorian style wedding dress, sitting on this chair with all these people around her. And I stared at her and I thought, she doesn't look like a normal woman in her young 20s. Like, what is it about her? She just looks weird. And then I realized, you know what it is? She looks really pure and innocent. And really, who in their young 20s in our world looks pure and innocent anymore, So she kind of stood out like a sore thumb. And I commented on this to the person who brought me to the wedding. And she said to me, maybe if she looks pure and innocent, it's because she is. And then she proceeded to tell me that not only had this young woman never slept with her fiance or presumably any other man, but they had never even fooled around, hugged, kissed, held hands. They had never even touched. She was marrying a woman she'd never touched. And my jaw just dropped open. I spent the whole wedding like, with my jaw on my chest. And that was kind of my introduction to the whole idea of not having any physical relationship before you get married. And that became the basis of my first book.
Wow. I just think that's a fascinating story. And you were just so drawn to it. One of the things I find compelling about the way you talk about women and religion and spirituality and intimacy and sexuality is that it makes so much sense. The whole idea of modesty, the rabbi, I like the way the rabbi and I were talking about modesty. Rabbi, why don't you share with her what you were talking about? Modesty is not just about how we dress. So I love what you were saying, Rabbi.
It's about respect. It's about self-respect, and it's about respect for others. And if I come into your home, I follow your rules, and I am sensitive to your sensitivities. And in a sense, when we talk about personal space, we're coming into other people's realm, into their domain. And having that sense that my inner self is more important, more significant, more valuable than my outer self is something that fills us with a sense of personal dignity and allows us to recognize the dignity in others. I'm sure you'll expand upon this, Gila, but I've often thought in 1995, Miss America was crowned. It was a young woman by the name of Heather Whitestone, who was remarkable in a number of ways. She happened to be deaf, which was quite extraordinary. But she announced, I think, after she was coronated, that she was engaged and that she and her fiance had not touched for the first 6 months that they dated. Now, this was not a Jewish woman. It was a woman who's part of the popular culture, which does not appear to have any respect for modesty at all. And yet she had this sense of personal dignity, this sense of personal discipline. And it was really quite extraordinary to hear from her this message of self-restraint and self-control and personal dignity.
Wow. And I've heard you speak on male-female relationships and God. If you wouldn't mind addressing that, I love the way you speak about that in terms of intimacy and love.
Okay, I'm not exactly sure what aspect of it you want me to speak on.
You were talking about life is about
but-
relationships, and the closest is with God, and the second is with our relationship with the partner.
Right. Well, I'll go even a little further. I'll say that our relationship with a partner is almost like a paradigm for our relationship with God, which is exactly why in the days when the temple was standing, the high priest, the holiest person, or the person who officiated the holiest ceremonies, had to be married, because the assumption was, until you've known the intimacy of a marital relationship, how can you know what that intense closeness to God could possibly feel like? And that's why the whole book, The Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim, is a somewhat almost erotic description of a very deeply passionate, loving male-female relationship, and it's used as a paradigm for our relationship with God. So the idea is that relationships are meant to be holy. They're not just meant to grant pleasure and contentment and happiness, although certainly that as well. But they're meant to kind of help us access a deeper level of reality in which we begin to really understand what love is on a very, very deep level, and what oneness with another person is, so that we can then hopefully transfer that experience onto our relationship with God, which is much more difficult because of course, God is abstract and doesn't verbally respond to us and requires a lot of faith to believe in him. But there's no better preparation for that than a marital relationship.
And I think you're a best-selling author, The Magic Touch, Outside Inside, Head to Heart, Choosing to Love, Finding Ourselves in a Crowd. And my favorite that goes with this topic is Hands Off, This May Be Love. I love that idea. And it is so paradoxical that if you want to be closer, don't touch. I love that. So tell me about the inspiration for you writing about that and speaking about that globally, because you've been all over so many countries, what, like 40 major countries all around the world?
Not
Amazing.
quite. About
Not
40
quite?
major, about 40 major cities in North America, and a number of other countries as well, but not 40 yet.
Well, not yet. Well, it'll happen. It'll happen. I think that, and you're reaching people through Zoom all over too. There you are speaking in Jerusalem to America. So there you go. You're reached. So what was the inspiration for Hands Off, This May Be Love?
So Hands Off, This May Be Love is actually a rewrite of The Magic Touch for a non-Jewish audience. I had particularly religious Christians in mind. Okay, because religious Christians, they don't call it guarding touch or cherishing touch, shmirat negiah, as we do, but they call it sexual purity, or my favorite term that they use is sexual integrity. I love that. Sexual integrity. They too have the same concept. So what led me to write The Magic Touch originally was when I realized that even Jewish teenagers brought up in Orthodox homes were not getting a practical approach to it. You can be very religious. I've had very religious kids come over to buy my book, and I'm surprised because it's usually the ones who are not as strong who want to buy it. And they say, no, Mrs. Manolson, you have to understand, we keep everything we're supposed to keep. We don't touch boys. We don't even hang out with boys, but we don't understand why. And we just want a practical explanation. And I say to them, listen, yes, you should have a practical explanation. It'll strengthen your belief in God, because every mitzvah, every commandment that God gives us is a gift. It's meant to make us happier. Telling you not to touch boys is not meant to make you miserable and ruin your adolescence. On the contrary, it's meant to spare you heartache. It's meant to get you in a more painless and direct line to the right person. So I wrote the book originally because I saw that religious kids weren't getting this. And then it kind of expanded out to non-religious kids. And then it expanded out to adults. I remember when I realized I had to put a more sophisticated looking cover on the book, when I think a 32 or 33-year-old guy told me he was on a date with a woman. At the end of the date, he didn't give her a good night kiss, and she was insulted. And he said to her, I'm sick and tired of superficial relationships. Here, read this. And he handed her my book. So I thought if people in their 30s are passing this around, it deserves a better cover. And
I think
and again,
he could be your publicist.
Yeah, exactly. And again, the whole purpose really was to make it really clear. This is not just a matter of sacrificing for your religiosity and having to do something that's unpleasant because you have to, because this is what the Torah says to do. No, it's so much to your benefit. And I thought that because I come from a non-religious background and I've had experience dating on both sides of the line, so to speak, I felt that I was a good spokeswoman for saying all this fun that you think you're missing is really not worth it in the end. And this other approach about not touching is actually going to really serve you well.
I agree. And as a psychologist who's done a lot of work with individuals at various ages of their in their life, whether they're in a couple now or looking to be in a couple. One thing I know is that intimacy, if it's too soon, can truncate trust and getting to know someone truly in an intimate way. Sex can get in the way. Not only does it make many of us stupid, I think our IQ points go down out of our sleeves, because then pretty soon we're, brain addled with all these hormones and thoughts and ideas that are not always the best advisors for choices, right? And I think that your advice is just so beautifully put. I'm charmed by the way you write and speak.
And you
Thank
also
you
talk
so
about being a spokeswoman. Just to tell you a brief story, when I was teaching in the same school with my wife at that time, I had a class of the young ladies, ninth graders, girls, who were they fancied themselves to be young feminists, and we got off to a bit of a rocky start, and they were very combative, and it went on like that for a few weeks until one day I had some sort of a conflict. I had to miss class, and I asked my wife to substitute for me. And I finished what I was doing, got back a little bit early. I looked through the window into the classroom, and these girls were literally sitting in a semicircle at my wife's feet, gazing up at her with these reverent expressions. And the bell rang, and I opened the door and said, "Thank you, Mrs. Goldson. Please come back and teach us again sometime." And after the girls were gone, I said to my wife, "What did you say to them?" And she said, "I said the same thing you say to them." I said, "What are you talking about?" She says, "You're a man. When you say it, it's sexist. I'm a woman. When I say it, it's beautiful."
It's very, very true. I'll go even a step further without wanting to offend you, Rabbi. But there's actually something somewhat obnoxious sometimes about a man purporting to tell a woman what her role should be, or why she should be dressed modestly, or kind of anything. When it comes from a fellow woman, it's kind of like a man telling a woman, like, how she should breathe during labor and birth. It's like, get out of here. You've never been there. You don't know what it's like. You want a woman, and it's a shared experience. And when a woman can promote modesty, she's not promoting it with any, like, there's no reason to suspect her of having any hidden agenda of wanting to keep you in your place, or keep you down, or silence you, or anything like that. If she's self-respecting, that she's doing it because she believes it's going to increase your own self-respect.
Yes. And personal power. I was part of a program helping young women who were in a juvenile prison. And one of the things I ended up teaching them was manners, including how to sit and stand modestly, how to say no. So I think that some of the stuff in your books talks about boundaries, how we show respect for ourselves, how we gain personal power by holding ourselves dear. I think that's a big part of the magic that you bring in your writing and in your spoken word. That whole idea of becoming more of the amazingness that we can each be by holding ourselves dear. I just love that.
Well, the more that you liberate yourself, and liberate is the word here, the more that you liberate yourself from the need for affirmation, public approval, male attention, whatever it is, you become more and more centered in yourself. And and liberation is exactly the word for it. You simply have a sense of empowerment. You have a sense that just because some good-looking guy walks down the street, I don't have to like flip a switch and immediately enter into flirt mode, or whatever it is. It's like, no, I am who I am. I'll choose how I want to behave when I choose to behave that way. But nobody is going to prompt me or get me to move from my center. I know who I am at my core, and I'm staying there. until I choose to behave differently.
I
And
think
that's
that
a-
helps. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think it helps attract a more amazing kind of partner, you know?
Well, yeah, I learned that actually from experience that I witnessed myself, that I write about in my book Outside Inside, where a guy who happened upon a scene with a couple of women ended up being far more interested in the woman who was not overtly flirting with him, who kind of politely ignored him, just kind of kept doing what she was doing, looked up once in a while to smile or nod, and went back to what she was doing. And meanwhile, he was having a great time talking to her friend, and she figured, oh, he's probably interested in her. And later, he actually told her, that the fact that you didn't need to get my attention made me feel that you have more content to you and intrigued me and made me more interested in you. So this is one message I'm constantly trying to give girls, because they know that the quickest way to turn ahead is just to take off half your clothes, and be willing to get physical with a guy. And my whole point, okay, is that, yeah, you will attract a certain kind of guy very easily that way. You want a quality guy? You want a guy who really wants a real relationship? Then don't sell yourself short. Don't put the cart before the horse. Don't let sex appeal be your major calling card. Let him get to know you. Build a relationship based upon, communication rather than skin to skin contact. And that's how you land a great relationship.
I heard a
With
story a
yourself,
number of
with
years
God,
ago.
and with the partner. Rabbi, I'm sorry.
I heard a story a number of years ago. You may know it better than I do. That there's a young, I think it was a young Filipino woman who was walking out of the New York City Public Library, and there were a few young men walking up into the library. And this is a woman who was very attractive and showed herself off. And one of these young men saw her and then quickly looked away. And she stopped. She was stunned. She'd never elicited that reaction. And she was baffled, but she noticed that the young man was wearing a skull cap. And so she turned around, went back into the library to look up Jewish culture to understand, maybe I can understand why this person reacted this way. And she discovered the concept of personal dignity, and it changed the whole course of her life.
Yeah. I actually was told a story about a Jordanian woman who I think read my book, The Magic Touch of Something, and consequently wanted to convert to Judaism. But the fact is that Judaism's ability, and please don't be offended by this word, to civilize men, if I can say that, or at least
I think all
Judaism-
women will like that.
Okay, but it's not, look, God forbid, I'm not saying men uncivilized, but however, some behaved in an uncivilized way. Judaism's ability to bring out the best in men it's probably its strongest selling point. To turn men into the wonderful people that they're capable of being. I once got a phone call from a young Israeli man, and he said to me, he said in Hebrew, but I'll say it over in English. He said, Mrs. Manolson, if you speak to women, this is what I think you should tell them about us men. He said, we men have an outer will and an inner will. And my outer will is for what looks good and what feels good now. And if a woman dresses provocatively and is willing to get physical with me, I'm going to go for that. I'm going to go after my outer will. He said, but we also have an inner will. And he said, my inner will is for the same thing that women want. I want love. I want depth. I want emotional intimacy. And when a woman dresses more modestly and refuses to get physical with me, she forces me to get in touch with my own inner will. She brings out a whole different side of me. And we end up having a relationship that could be really meaningful. And he concluded by saying, you women have more power than you realize. Now, I'm certainly not saying women are responsible for men's behavior. They're fully responsible for their own behavior. However, people can elicit the better side of someone else. We can be spiritual catalysts for one another. And when a woman maintains her dignity. She catalyzes the spirituality in a male. And don't we all want more men like that walking around this world? I sure as heck do.
You know, what
We
you just
do.
said there is something that's really compelling. You say women have more power than they know. And we live in a culture that to a large extent is dispensing with traditional roles because they see those roles as oppressive and sexist. And yet implicit in what you're saying is that there may be some profound reason why those traditional roles benefit all of us. Can you speak to that?
Well, yeah. I mean, there are differences, innate differences between males and females. It's been pretty well documented and proven, as far as I know. And one of them is that men's brains are hardwired to be more visual. Okay, men will have pinups of women on their walls of a sort that women will not have of men. And so I don't want to get into details about what they do while looking at those pinups. But what I'm saying is that men are triggered visually. That's just the way they work. And women are far more triggered by other things as well. Okay, for example, I will ask I remember once I asked a bunch of guys, it was really funny. These are 11th graders. I said, imagine walking to a restaurant and you see the most stunning girl you've ever seen in your life. And she opens up her mouth and starts saying really stupid stuff. I said, you probably don't want to marry her, but I bet she'd still be very happy to go out with her. And they're all like, yep. And I said to girls, now you imagine walking to a restaurant, there's a really cute guy sitting there. He opens up his mouth and starts saying really stupid stuff. His attractiveness plummets, correct? And they're all like, yup. So we look at one another differently. And so the traditional idea that women have historically been more modest or been seen as being like the guardians of modesty or whatever you want to call it is simply because of the fact that if you don't want to be reduced to something just physical by what feminists call the male gaze, okay, then you're just simply being self-protective. You're protecting your own human dignity by dressing more modestly. Okay. And, look, if I created the world, I might have not created gender differences the way they are. But as a feminist, I believe that we have to deal with reality. And the reality is, if men and women are different, don't pretend they aren't. And don't pretend that I can walk around however I want and still expect men to respect me. Because that's just, it's a joke. It's a joke. I remember once reading a story, and I think it was Reader's Digest, about a woman who was set up with a guy, and the guy was told she's very academic and brainy. So he was very surprised when she showed up for the date in a very provocative dress with a thigh-high slit and low cut and the whole works. And he just blurted out, "Wow, your brains don't show at all." And that's exactly it. When I was on the Yale campus, I'll never forget this. Playboy magazine came to campus to do a special feature edition on women of the Ivy League. And they were paying various amounts for what state you allowed yourself to be photographed in, shall we say. Okay. Now, I remember thinking to myself, no, like, you're wasting your time. This is Yale. We're all intellectual women here. Nobody's going to be photographed for your magazine. Women were lined up to be photographed for it because they wanted to send the message. You think all of us Ivy League women are a bunch of sexless, brainy dorks? Well, guess what? We can be brainy and sexy. But the point is, I don't think any guy flipping through that edition of Playboy was fantasizing about having an intellectual discussion with one of these women. Oh, do you think she has a PhD? Wow, I'd like to discuss Kant and Descartes with her. I don't think so. So this is reality. I believe in dealing with reality, whether you like it or not, it's reality. And there is a lot of wisdom behind certain traditional aspects of femininity.
So let me go back to your origin story, which speaks to this issue of, can you be a feminist and an observant Orthodox woman at the same time. The issue of going in and the partitions, the separation, that's something that I think is pretty well misunderstood. I'm Catholic, so I'm not Jewish. I don't really understand it. I've asked many people from various religions, they don't understand it. The rabbis explained it to me, and my friend has explained it to me. She's an observant woman. Please address that. I'm curious.
The idea of a partition historically was simply made to prevent, and I'll be honest, to prevent men from being distracted by women. So what this woman really said to me at the wall, wouldn't you have a hard time concentrating on your
Yes.
prayers if there's a cute
Yeah.
thing next to you? That's not, the partition is really primarily to prevent the visual distraction of men, by women, okay? And that's really important. And what women don't realize is that we are the beneficiaries when we create a society in which men are less focused on women. When a man can go to a synagogue and pray without having an attractive woman distracting him right next to him, he ends up being a better kind of male, and the kind of male that you're going to want your daughter to marry more than the other kind, okay? So the partition is designed to prevent distraction during prayer. Now, the problem with partitions is that some of them are affected in ways that peripheralize women. And as a feminist, I find that offensive, I'll be honest with you. And I simply choose to go to synagogues in which I feel that the partition is affected in a way to make me feel included, to make me feel that my presence there is appreciated, and I'm not kind of like stuck in some back corner somewhere or whatever. So I have no problem, and I'm heartily endorse the idea of separation. However, I have distinct preferences about how the separation should be affected.
I think
I have heard another explanation that, additional explanation, that traditionally men have seen themselves as the protectors of women. And when we're standing in front of God, we want to feel that God is our protector. So if I feel that I'm responsible for protecting the woman next to me, or the woman next to me feels that I feel that she's protecting me, then we're both going to have more difficulty feeling that relationship with God as our protector.
That's interesting. I never heard that before. It's a really interesting idea.
But it does lead into another element here that I'd like to sort of move towards, is that we've been talking about modesty in terms of sexuality and attraction. Doesn't modesty really go beyond that? Doesn't modesty also apply to men? Doesn't it apply to society? I mean, how can we see modesty in a way that transcends the whole sexual element?
Absolutely. And the reason why it's emphasized more for women is because women are more overtly sexual in certain ways, and men view them more sexually. So they're a greater danger of diminishing themselves in their own eyes, which is really, really tragic. But of course, it applies strongly both to men and women. And in that sense, modesty, or tzniut, as we say in Hebrew, which I actually prefer to translate as internality. Okay, but internality basically means I want to downplay the more superficial aspects of myself so that people have a better chance of being able to relate to me for who I am inside. And so I can wean myself from needing, again, all this superficial attention or approval, whatever it is. When a teenage boy goes zooming through a neighborhood on a motorcycle without a muffler, okay, he's being just as immodest as a woman wearing a low-cut dress. It's the same thing. It's like saying, oh, wow, I want people to look at me and think, wow, he's cool. He has a noisy motorcycle. Wow. Like, what does that have to do with who you are? All you're doing is you're creating a false image for yourself. And the more people invest in that image, the more it takes over their true sense of self, to the point where they can really, really lose who they are inside. I read a really interesting book once in Hebrew about all kinds of women in the performing arts, models, dancers, singers, whatever, who all had eating disorders. And the theme that ran through the book was an absent sense of self, like a black hole where their selfhood should be. And that is the product of a very, very immodest society. And so we have to fight that at every turn. At every turn, we have to say, I'm not my looks, I'm not my body, I'm not my achievements. What happens to the achievement-oriented guy who loses his job? Does his self-esteem plummet? Does he feel like I'm not worth anything anymore? God forbid. Okay. I'm not even the causes I support. I'm not anything short of my soul. And unfortunately, some people discover that the hard way when they have a lot of things taken away from themselves and they're kind of left with only their soul, and they realize, oh, this is who I was all along, a soul. My whole tactic in life is to try and preempt God, so to speak, and try and figure out what I'm meant to learn without having to learn it the hard way. And so I'm constantly working on trying to get more in touch with myself as a soul while my body is still intact. And I still have other sources of goodness in my life.
Well, and as I might say, as a modest woman, you also look beautiful. So I don't think modesty in any ways downplays beauty. I think it presents a beauty in a different way. I wanted to go back to two issues. One is the motorcycle. I don't know if you've ever ridden one, but part of why they make them loud is for safety, so that people hear them because they don't always see them. Now, you can be immodest with a super loud or fancy, that could be separate. That's showy, but just to be clear that some of the loudness is on purpose for safety.
I think so. Okay.
Yeah, so has nothing to do with, yeah.
I've just heard some that seem to be much louder than safety would require. You know what I mean?
Well, there are
They take off
limits.
some mufflers.
Yeah, there are sound limits for what is considered safe in different areas, in noisy areas, residential, whatever. So we've begun to put modesty requirements on the sound in different organizations, because sometimes we don't have our own limits. I love the idea of being a feminist and an observant woman. One of the questions that comes up for a lot of women is the issue of power. How can you think that you're the reason why men are distracted and at the same time feel powerful and not marginalized? That's one of the questions. You've addressed that well, but I think you address it super well in other forums that I've heard. Please address that. How can we not be second-class citizens if we know that we are the distractors?
Okay. Because we are distractors only when we are distracting. I don't know, some women might disagree with me, but I don't feel that my inherent existence is distracting. I think I could be capable, or at least when I was younger, I could be capable of being distracting by wearing less clothing, perhaps, or whatever. Okay. But I have my personhood also. And I believe that every woman has the ability to present herself in such a way that she sends a very loud, clear message. I am to be related to from my mind, from my thoughts, from my ideas. I even asked my rabbi about this once, because I speak for, there are some women who will only speak for all female audiences. Well, I don't. I speak for mixed audiences. I will speak for all male audiences. I'll speak to anyone who wants to hear me talk. You want to know the truth? Okay. But I asked a rabbi once, what is this thing with women who won't speak for men? Like, should I really not be speaking in front of men or something? And he said, no, there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't be. He said, it all depends upon how you comport yourself. If you get up there and you're wearing a lot of makeup and, red outlined lips and fake long eyelashes, and you're dressing provocatively, and your gestures and your body language and everything like that is drawing attention to, I'd say, to your form rather than your content, so to speak, to your outside rather than your inside, that is immodest, that's inappropriate, and no, then you should not be speaking in front of men. But if you get up there in a dignified way, you're conveying thoughts, you're conveying ideas and information, you've downplayed, your overt sexuality or something like that, okay, then you are fine. And then at that point, if a given man nevertheless finds you distracting with full head covering and with minimal makeup, or I don't wear makeup at all, but I know I'm weird in that way. Most women wear some makeup, and modest clothing. That's his problem. Then that becomes his problem, and he shouldn't look at you. But it does not mean that, God forbid, you should stop sharing your message if you're doing it in a dignified way.
Well,
And
I
so that's
think
what
that your message is amplified by the way you behave. I think it's beautifully done. The only thing I disagree with is the lipstick. Cuban culture. My father would say, risk greatness. Like be brave, do what you need to do. And my mother would say, but first put on the lipstick. So in my culture, you put on the lipstick, you're well dressed. So I know there's some cultural issues there. I love the
No, I
idea
don't-
of women being powerful. And I think that the rabbi speaks to how powerful women are as well. I love the way he speaks about his wife. It's very nice. And I think she's an amazingly strong woman who makes such a big difference,
And she might be listening. So.
Well, good. Well, hi. He talks about you. I'm just saying. Well, that's good.
I once heard power described as the ability to affect change. So if you are trying to affect change in the world, it doesn't have to always be overt. It doesn't have to be heavy-handed. It doesn't have to even be public. It can be very quiet and behind the scenes. And nevertheless, if you are affecting change, then you are powerful. And that's how I look at it. I can affect a lot of change without having to spotlight myself, without having to yell, without having to occupy a podium. I can basically just share my ideas quietly in any number of ways. If I'm affecting change in the world, then I'm powerful.
And I think you can be a feminist without disagreeing with people or being offensive. When I was young, I thought feminists had to dress like men, and act like them.
That's an important point that you've made, is that you don't have to make yourself unattractive to be dignified. The other thought that enters my mind is that, and we don't get into politics on this show, but right now in America here, we have a president that some question whether he's in complete control. And it could be, some people are concerned by this, that there's somebody else behind the scenes that may actually be making decisions. If that's so, that's the person with the power, not the person who's holding the office.
Exactly. And yes, and it could be one's wife, or it could be another political figure, but it doesn't really matter. That the person who is on center stage does not have to be the person who is the most powerful one by any means.
So what advice do you give to men and women in terms of being more powerful with regard to what you've learned about how we present ourselves and how we really are inside? What advice do you give?
To me, there is nothing more powerful in the world than helping put people in touch with their own souls. It sounds, I hope it doesn't sound banal or trite, but it really is that simple. And so if I have a conversation with somebody in which I can get her to realize who she really is, what her potential contribution to the world could be, what kind of a relationship she's capable of, what kind of a man she deserves, then I feel like I've exercised phenomenal power. I feel like I've changed my small corner of the world a little bit. And I believe that has a ripple effect. And I really just believe it's by a lot of people creating ripples in the world, the stuff gets out there. And just the way we interact with people. I mean, I can think of people in my past who moved me, who made me rethink who I am as a woman, just by the way they acted. They never even said anything. And just by being yourself. I hate to say this, but it seems like there are very few people in this world who are really deeply in touch with themselves. And that's where it all begins.
I
That's
think
a
less
total
than
difference.
5 to 10% are truly in touch with themselves. That's my assessment
I totally agree.
at any given time. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, actually have had women come up to me after a class saying, Mrs. Manolson, it sounds great. You're talking about getting in touch with your internal self, but I don't know what my internal self is.
So what advice do
I
you give
really
to
don't
them?
know. So I'll say to them, okay, so who do you think you are? What do you think makes you special and unique in the world? So she'll say, you know, I'm really skinny and pretty. Or maybe she'll say, I'm a really talented guitar player. Or maybe she'll say, I'm a very successful lawyer. And I'll say, okay, so let's imagine that was taken away from you. Okay, you're a successful lawyer, you lose your job. Okay, or you have a horrible accident and you're cognitively impaired afterwards. Okay, so who are you now? What can you still do? And when they realize I can still shine light in the world, I can still love, I can still talk to people, I can still comfort people, I can still share my soul with people. I say, well, that's your real self. And now when you want to go back to being a lawyer, do it from that place. Do it from that place of I'm a lawyer because I have a higher purpose in the world, and law is helping me serve that purpose, but it is not my definition. So that's everything that I try and do, and especially with teenage girls, it's like really a challenge in this society, and everybody wants to be hot, you know, and just getting you to appreciate who you are. I mean, girls will say to me, they'll actually say to me, you know, remember one girl said to me, I'd like to stop touching my boyfriend and being physical with him, but I'm afraid he'll break up with me. Or girls will write into a magazine and they'll say, what do I do if a guy wants to sleep with me and I don't want to sleep with him? You know, I saw a letter like that. It was actually cited in a book that a friend of mine wrote, in which a young woman wrote into the editor of a women's magazine and asked that question. Now, if you asked me that question, I would say, if you don't want to sleep with him, don't. It's that, nothing more to say. It's your body, it's your choice. The editor of the women's magazine said, well, if you don't want to sleep with him, then, you know, give him something else. You know, you have to do some, I mean, you have to do something, you know. I'm like, that's the advice young women are being given today. Okay, so, you know, you owe somebody something. I don't care if you paid for dinner and tickets to a concert. You don't owe anybody anything when it comes to your body. And if you're afraid that you're about to go out on a date and that might be the bargaining chip at the end of the evening, then you state it at the beginning of the date. Say, I would love to go out. I just want you to know, however, that I don't view you paying for me as that I'm going to owe you something, right? So we can go Dutch if you want, or you can still treat me, and I accept the treat, but it's not advance payment.
No, that's an older profession.
Exactly.
It's
Exactly. But there are a lot of women who find themselves in that situation.
Well, I think it's true of so many people these days, and maybe it was always that way. I don't know. I have to wax philosophically on this one. I think it's hard for people to set boundaries that fit what they think is the right thing to do, and they're afraid to not be liked. I think the biggest gift we give people as leaders in whatever capacity, in our home, in the community, at work, is that we don't need people to approve of us or to like us. We do what's right, we do what's best, and hopefully they'll respect us, and maybe they'll like us, maybe they won't. But I think that's one of the best gifts we can give to people. Not needing them to like us gives us the freedom to be our best selves, as you say, to impact people at the soul level.
Absolutely. And when you talk about boundaries, I mean, boundaries were kind of blown to smithereens starting in the 60s.
I remember. Yeah,
I do too, you know. We're all
there was
sitting
so
on
much pressure to be cool, and that meant you slept with everyone, you know, and did drugs and disrespected people in authority. It was an interesting time for a group that talked about love. There was a lot of disrespect. And I think different generations swing one way and one the other. And hopefully we'll find ourselves somewhere in a more respectful place, more powerful and respectful place. So
God willing, God willing.
God willing.
Boundaries is so essential, because boundaries is a way of saying, you know, boundaries is what keeps out what's meant to stay out and protects what's inside. And when that boundary is porous and everything just flows back and forth, you lose your sense of self, you lose your dignity, you become fair game for almost anybody.
Absolutely. And if we don't have our own values established, then we default to everyone else, just like the Rabbi's TED Talk. You know, whose values are you reenacting? And I think that understanding who we are and what we believe in is a lot of work. It's really obnoxious process, because you can't just borrow your parents or some TV star's values. You have to discern them for yourselves, and that's just a pain in the neck.
Yeah, and if I could,
go ahead.
Oh, if I could just like emphasize the point that particularly in our society today, we don't need sheep. We need people who are willing to stand up for these values and not be afraid. And I'll just tell you a story that was so disheartening, but I think that we're capable of turning it around. I really am optimistic if people just get on top of things. But I remember when a little girl I knew, she was 6 years old in first grade, and she became a cheerleader. Now, I was really taken aback, because in my day, cheerleading was something you did starting in junior high, and I never heard of a first grade cheerleader before. Okay, it turns out she was cheering on the first grade football players. So I asked her mother, I said, don't you have enough feminist in you to object to your little girl being socialized into the role of cheering on the boys at age 6? And she said two things that really bothered me. First of all, she said, I didn't like it, but I didn't feel like fighting her about it. Now, I personally feel that when a little daughter's humanity is at stake, you fight for it, and you fight your daughter for it if you have to. But the second thing she said was even more disturbing. She said, but then what happened is my daughter came home from cheerleading practice with a cheer that included the words, shake your thing. And at that point, she said, I went to the cheerleading coach and I said, excuse me, but I don't want my little daughter to know she has a thing, and I certainly don't want her shaking it. And the coach graciously removed that cheer from the roster of cheers. What happened next? What happened next was that a half a dozen other mothers all called up this woman and said, thank you for speaking up. We wanted to, but we were afraid to be considered prudes. Now, when a mother is more concerned about what other people are going to think that she's a prude than protecting her own daughter's personhood and letting her take her thing at age 6, it's a really serious problem. Those mothers have a lot of work to do on themselves. And I really believe that we women have to get our acts together and realize that the only person I have to answer to in this world is myself and God. And the whole world, for what I care, can think that I'm a prude. And that's just fine with me if I'm doing right by my daughter. And I would like women to have that sense of self-confidence and to just say, I don't care what the world thinks about me. You know, as a Jew, we have always been in the minority. Jews have always been, you know, the whole world believed in idols. The whole world believed that Jews poisoned the wells and caused the Black Plague. The whole Christian world believed, no offense, but you know, that Jews murdered a little boy every Passover time and used his blood to make matzahs. And we Jews, this tiny little fraction, knew the whole world is crazy and we're right. We know the truth. And so we had to take that forward, all of us, Jewish and non-Jewish, into our lives today and realize you might be 1/10 of 1% of the population in terms of your beliefs. The whole world might think it's just fine for little 6-year-old girls to shake their thing and be cheerleaders for the boys, you know, or whatever it is. And if you don't think that way, you stand up for what you believe in. Believe in yourself. Just believe in yourself. That's the message I would love to like really leave people with. Believe in yourself.
Well, that's, I'm so glad that you articulated that so powerfully, because we've sort of not driven home today our main topic, which is ethics. But as we've mentioned many times in the past, that the C in ethics stands for courage. And courage is only possible when we have confidence in ourselves, in our beliefs, in our values, and in the relationships that support us in being able to live those values, and to be able to speak firmly, respectfully, but with commitment, with courage, to show respect for those who may not see things our way without compromising who we are or what we believe. That really positions us to have a positive influence on society. And clearly you are having that influence, and we
Yes,
salute you for that.
yes.
Thank you very much. And I feel it really is a very strong ethical issue. And to me, everything we've spoken about tonight is inseparable from the larger topic of ethics. And God willing, we should be able to implant it in our lives.
Amen.
What could be more ethical than speaking up for what is right and working hard to be the best version of ourselves we can be, so that we can impact others as well. I can't imagine anything stronger than that. Well, I'm going to ask the rabbi for the word of the day, and then we'll ask you for some final words of wisdom. Rabbi?
The word of the day is a word you may not know. It was a word I didn't know until recently. The word is saccade. Saccade, S-A-C-C-A-D-E. And it has two meanings, which at first appear to have nothing to do with one another. The first is, it's the act of checking a horse quickly with a single strong pull of the reins. And the second meaning is an ophthalmological word. It's a series of small, jerky movements of the eye when changing focus from one point to another. And we live in a world where there's so many distractions. There's so many, everybody's trying to get our attention. It's what social media is all about. It's been, you've heard this many times probably, that we now, human beings now officially have a shorter attention span than a goldfish. Goldfish is 9 seconds, human beings are 8 seconds. We flit from one topic to another. And our society is increasingly designed to pull us away. And that modesty is really about filtering the distractions, the physical, the superficial, the substanceless distractions of life, to help us focus on the internal, on the substantive, on the truly meaningful. And by doing that, we can rein in our baser impulses, and we can allow our true selves, our noble selves, to hold those reins, to keep us on course, to keep us focused, so that we really can live more meaningful, more beautiful, and ultimately more intimate lives.
Well said, Rabbi.
Right. Well said.
Wow.
Gila, thank you for joining us.
So-
It really has been a pleasure. And could you leave us with a final thought?
Well, I was just thinking while you were speaking, you threw out this very interesting word, which I had never heard before. So I thought maybe I'd share with you my favorite word in the entire English language, which you will have heard before. But that word is wholesome. Wholesome. To me, wholesomeness represents somebody who doesn't need to prove anything to anybody, who's just happy in her skin, is who she is, natural, down to earth, authentic. And to me, that goes hand in hand with modesty. And I'm not talking about obviously skirt lengths and sleeve lengths, because you can be a very wholesome, modest person, although you might not be following Orthodox dress code or whatever. And sad to say, you can be following an Orthodox dress code and be lacking in internal modesty and wholesomeness. Okay, obviously the two are best when done together, okay? But I just kind of want to leave all your listeners with my own personal blessing that they move towards an ideal of wholesomeness in their own lives, and that they spread that out to others.
Beautiful last words. Thank you.
Thank you for
Dr.
having me on.
We're just delighted and honored.
Doctor, what's the last word?
All right. So the last word, I've been listening with excitement, and I know some people will not quite understand what you're talking about. So I ask everyone out there listening, and remember that everything we say and don't say, everything we do and don't do, and how we do it has impact on ourselves, others, and the context in which we find ourselves. And if you knew there was a secret weapon that could help you be the best self, wouldn't you want to try it out? So I urge everyone to try the idea of modesty, of how we present ourselves. Are we allowing people to see the true power in us? Are we offering distraction with bad language, too much yelling? Because modesty can also be yelling and bullying and, how we present ourselves in our language, overly powerful, overly aggressive. So ask yourself, if you knew this was a secret weapon in being more powerful and influencing everyone more positively, wouldn't you give it a try? So ask, how are you already managing this modesty in your life so beautifully? And what 1, 2, or 3 things can you do to up your game so you can have a more positive influence? So that's what I leave people with. Thank you both for being on. This was a very thoughtful discussion. You've given me a lot to think about as well. And I will certainly look forward to having you on the show again. I know the Rabbi will too. Thank you all, and have a very nice week until the next podcast of the Rabbi and the Shrink. If you have questions, please send us an email, podcast@therabbiandtheshrink.com. And we look forward to hearing your comments. Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.